Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, August 16, 2024. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, presents proposals to, as she puts it, lower the cost of living, including for food, health care, and housing, in a speech in Raleigh, North Carolina. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, the Republican vice presidential nominee, speaks at the Police Association headquarters in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, about crime prevention. Senator Vance is also asked about comments from Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee. He said that the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which honors civilians, is, quote, much better than the Medal of Honor, because service members receiving the nation's highest military honor are often severely wounded or dead. President Joe Biden creates the Springfield 1908 Race Riot National Monument in Illinois to remember the tragic, deadly chapter in the hometown of President Abraham Lincoln. Transportation Department announces a safety plan known as V2X, or Vehicles to Everything, which involves connecting cars and trucks electronically to each other and roadside infrastructure with the goal of avoiding crashes and saving tens of thousands of lives a year. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy announces he will appoint his former chief of staff, George Helmy, to the U.S. Senate to replace Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, who will be resigning next week after his conviction on federal bribery charges. And some news from the Middle East. Israel-Hamas war ceasefire negotiators from the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar say they have presented both sides with a proposal and hope to finalize the details in the coming days on how to implement it. President Joe Biden says the ceasefire is closer than we have ever been. Story from the Washington Post. Vice President Kamala Harris on Friday unveiled an aggressively populist economic agenda, providing the most detailed vision yet of her governing priorities since becoming the Democratic Party's presidential nominee. Ahead of Harris's speech in North Carolina, her campaign announced her support for more than a dozen economic policies aimed at lowering costs for American families, including some that went beyond what President Joe Biden had promised. The most striking proposals were for the elimination of medical debt for millions of Americans, the first ever ban on price gouging for groceries and food, a cap on prescription drug costs, a $25,000 subsidy for first-time home buyers, and a child tax credit that would provide $6,000 per child to families for the first year of a baby's life. That was from the Washington Post. Here's part of Vice President Harris's speech in Raleigh, North Carolina, talking about lowering food prices.
We all know that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed. But our supply chains have now improved, and prices are still too high. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%. Many of the big food companies are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades. And while many grocery chains pass along these savings, others still aren't. Look, I know most businesses are creating jobs, contributing to our economy, and playing by the rules. But some are not. And that's just not right. And we need to take action when that is the case. As Attorney General in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, including wholesalers that inflated the price of prescription medication, and companies that conspired with competitors to keep prices of electronics high. I won more than $1 billion for consumers. So believe me, as president, I will go after the bad actors. And I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gouging on food. My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules, and we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead. We will help the food industry become more competitive because I believe competition is the lifeblood of our economy. More competition means lower prices for you and your families. Now compare what Donald Trump plans to do. He wants to impose what is, in effect, a national sales tax on everyday products and basic necessities that we import from other countries. That will devastate Americans. It will mean higher prices on just about every one of your daily needs. A Trump tax on gas, a Trump tax on food, a Trump tax on clothing, a Trump tax on over-the-counter medication. And you know, economists have done the math. Donald Trump's plan would cost a typical family $3,900 a year.
Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, today in Raleigh, North Carolina, part of what the campaign called a major economic speech. She also talked about housing and health care costs. You can find her full remarks at our video library at cspan.org. New York Times reports that former President Donald J. Trump has appointed Linda McMahon and Howard Lutnick, two of his friends and financial backers, to oversee a transition team preparing for his potential return to power, according to a statement from his campaign released on Friday. Ms. McMahon, a major donor to Mr. Trump, who is married to the professional wrestling promoter Vince McMahon, served in his first administration as the head of the Small Business Administration. Mr. Lutnick is the chairman and chief executive of Cantor Fitzgerald, a financial services firm. Neither has been associated with Project 2025, a conservative policy plan seized on by Democrats. The team is starting later than normal, with most transition work beginning in the spring. That was from the New York Times. Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, the Republican vice presidential nominee, today was at the Milwaukee Police Association headquarters in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, talking about the issue of crime.
We did a little roundtable, and behind us, I didn't actually notice it until I got up and stood and looked at it, were all of these photos of fallen heroes across the state of Wisconsin, people in law enforcement who had given their life for public safety. And I think the most important way to honor their sacrifice is to make the job of their brothers and sisters in arms easier, right? Why did they give their lives? They gave their lives for the basic idea of public safety, and we need a president, Donald J. Trump, who makes their job easier and not harder. We've got to cut out with the anti-law enforcement craziness. We've got to cut out with some of the policies that have come from the Harris administration that make it harder for the police to do their job. And let's just talk, thank you all, but let me just say a few words about the policies that have made it harder to be a police officer, and most importantly, harder for it to just be a citizen who wants basic public safety in this country. So Kamala Harris is on a tour where she's trying to redefine her record as a tough-on-crime prosecutor. And yet, if you look at Kamala Harris's record as a prosecutor, it is the opposite of tough on crime. For example, Kamala Harris pursued a policy that would recategorize people who had committed sex crimes with minors and people who had raped unconscious victims as nonviolent crimes. And what does that mean? That means those people get out of prison earlier. That means their victims have to suffer the psychological abuse of seeing them walking around our streets sooner. And that means the police officer have a few more sickos that they have to take care of instead of being in prison where those sex offenders belong. If Kamala Harris was so tough on crime, why is she making it easier for sex offenders to get out of prison? I think the media should ask her that question. Of course, Kamala Harris refuses to answer questions, but this is important stuff. I grew up in a family where we didn't have a whole lot of money, and I was raised by a tough-as-nails grandmother who, despite the fact that we didn't always live in the easiest neighborhood, we had something that our country believed every child deserved. Whether they were rich or poor, our country believed that every child deserved public safety. And as Republicans, we don't think the government should do everything, but the things that it needs to do, it has to do well, and public safety is at the very top of the list.
Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, Republican vice presidential nominee, today at the Milwaukee Police Association headquarters in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He also answered reporters' questions as he has been doing at just about every campaign event he's held that wasn't a big arena speech. One question was about what Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, said Thursday night. From an NBC News article, former President Donald Trump lauded a wealthy donor on whom he bestowed the Presidential Medal of Freedom as having gotten the better award compared to the top military honor, the Medal of Honor, because those recipients are often deceased or injured. Speaking at a campaign event intended to discuss anti-Semitism, Trump was introduced by Miriam Adelson, a wealthy Republican donor and widow of Sheldon Adelson, who pumped millions of dollars of his own money into electing Republican candidates. He died in 2021. That was from the NBC News article. Here is the Republican presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, at that event at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey, Thursday night.
I watched Sheldon sitting so proud in the White House when we gave Miriam the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's the highest award you can get as a civilian. It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, but civilian version. It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets, or they're dead. She gets it, and she's a healthy, beautiful woman. It's very... And they're rated equal.
Former President Donald Trump, Republican presidential nominee, Thursday night in Bedminster, New Jersey. His vice presidential running mate, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, was asked for a reaction during his campaign event today in Milwaukee.
I wanted to ask you, Trump has been getting attacked from his comments at the press conference yesterday about what he said about the top military honor. And veterans have pointed out, he said that the civilian presidential honor is better than what wounded veterans have received. And I wondered, what do you say to veterans who think that's demeaning?
Well, look, I was with a group of veterans in Pennsylvania yesterday, and trust me, the veteran community is very, very much behind Donald Trump. So, look, what I would say to people is, look, what President Trump said during a ceremony, and I haven't seen the entire remarks, but my understanding is President Trump said during a ceremony that a person who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he was saying some nice things about her. He was saying some complimentary things about her. Donald Trump, I've seen give out a Congressional Medal of Honor. I've seen him give out a number of awards and commendations to military veterans. And, of course, I myself am a Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. This is a guy who loves our veterans and who honors our veterans. I don't think him complimenting and saying a nice word about a person who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom is in any way denigrating those who received military honors. They're two different awards, and I think the president was saying some nice things about a person that he liked, and that's a totally reasonable thing to do.
Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, Republican vice presidential nominee, today in Milwaukee. A Kamala Harris presidential campaign spokesperson put out a statement. Donald Trump knows nothing about service to anyone or anything but himself. For him to insult Medal of Honor recipients, just as he has previously attacked Gold Star families, mocked prisoners of war, and referred to those who lost their lives in service to our country as suckers and losers, should remind all Americans that we owe it to our service members, our country, and our future to make sure Donald Trump is never our nation's commander-in-chief again. Story from AP. President Joe Biden on Friday designated a national monument at the site of the 1908 race riot in Springfield, Illinois, a seminal moment in the United States' long and difficult history with racial violence targeting black people. Biden was joined in the Oval Office by lawmakers as well as civil rights and community leaders as he signed the proclamation establishing the monument on 1.57 acres of federal land. The monument is intended to be a solemn reminder of the two-day riot sparked by mobs of white residents tearing through Illinois' capital city under the pretext of meting out judgment against two black men, one jailed on a sexual assault charge involving a white woman, the other jailed in the separate murder of a white man. That was the article from Associated Press. Here's part of President Biden's remarks before signing the proclamation in the White House Oval Office.
Over 100 years ago this week, a mob not far from Lincoln's home unleashed a race riot in Springfield, and it literally shocked the conscience of the nation. It shocked the conscience of the nation. But these folks worked so hard to make sure a lot of people forgot it. There was railroad tracks there, there was a lot going on there, and people forgot it. As if, it didn't happen. You listen to some of our colleagues and think, oh, no. We've never had this problem. Well, you're going to continue to have these problems as we talk about the problems we had before, making sure we solve them. It also sparked the creation of the NAACP, and leaders here today, one of the most important organizations in my view in this country. By signing this designation for Springfield 1908 Race Riot National Monument, we remind ourselves we have no safe harbor unless we continue to remind people what happened. What happened. It's really important. And I'm, you know, as you've heard me say, when I had an operation years ago, the doctor told me what my chances were, and he said, you know, your problem is Senator, he said, you're a congenital optimist. Well, I am an optimist. I'm optimistic about this country because you're good people. But we can't let these things fade. And I want to thank the engineering firm that went out and found the remnants of the facility. I want to thank the Catholic Hospital for donating the site that was there to make this happen. And all these people behind me. And by the way, we have a Secretary of Interior who knows what she's doing. She cares a lot about all these things. So I know this may not seem significant to most Americans, but it's important. It's important. And everybody walk by this area and know what happened here, because it can happen again if we don't take care of ourselves and fight for this democracy.
President Joe Biden in the Oval Office. Some of the people there, the senators from Illinois, Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, also Illinois Congresswoman Nikki Buzinski, and the president of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. Senator Duckworth said that a bill to create the national monument to the 1908 Springfield race riot passed the U.S. Senate but was not brought up in the House. President Biden today posting on X, 2 years ago, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law after Kamala cast the tie-breaking vote. Folks, I'm so proud of all the ways this law has already started transforming the lives of hardworking American families. Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, put up a video on X on the IRA.
Hi, Senator Tammy Baldwin here. Today, we celebrate 2 years since our Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law. In just 2 years, our law is making a real difference for hardworking Wisconsin families, and I couldn't have been prouder to have voted for it. Our Inflation Reduction Act is taking on big drug companies and finally giving Medicare the power to negotiate the price of new drugs. Now, seniors across Wisconsin are saving hundreds of dollars a month on their prescription costs. Not only that, but hundreds of thousands of Wisconsinites are saving on their monthly health care premiums, and seniors are paying no more than $35 a month for the insulin that they need to stay healthy. I was proud to champion strong Buy America rules in the Inflation Reduction Act to create good-paying jobs and ensure American manufacturers are building the vehicles and infrastructure we need to move our zero-emission energy future forward. I'm also pleased that our law is putting us to work protecting Wisconsin's fresh coasts, wildlife, and wilderness. Our water and coastal communities are essential to our made-in-Wisconsin economy and our way of life. These are just a few of the ways our Inflation Reduction Act is building a better future for us. But I know we have more work to do to lower costs for families. You can count on me to keep working in Congress to lower healthcare costs for families, create good-paying jobs, tackle our climate crisis, and grow our made-in-Wisconsin economy.
Senator Tammy Baldwin, Democrat from Wisconsin, posting that video. The Senate Banking Committee Republican account on X, writing, today marks the 2-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, which Senator Tim Scott, Republican from South Carolina, the ranking member on that committee, noted is the worst name bill in history. The Inflation Reduction Act has been a disaster for American families and put the American dream further out of reach for far too many. That's the post from the Senate Banking Committee Republicans. They attached a chart that reads, since the Biden-Harris administration took office, inflation is up 20%, mortgage rates have ballooned over 150%, the median home price is at an all-time high. The U.S. House Ways and Means Committee held a field hearing today at the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines about tax policy. The members and the witnesses were surrounded by hay bales, and a cow sculpture. Not sure if it was butter. The chair of the committee, Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri, spoke about the scheduled expiration at the end of 2025 of major provisions in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There will be changes to income tax rates and brackets, the child tax credit, state and local tax deductions, mortgage interest deduction, and more. Here is Congressman Smith.
Republicans look at working families and want to make it easier to help them get ahead. And we know that a smaller government, less regulations, and less taxation is the way to do that. Under President Trump, we passed a tax cut that benefited the working class. After that tax cut, people making less than $100,000 got on average a 16% cut in their tax bill to the government, while the top 1% actually saw their share of taxes go up. Workers in the bottom 10% saw 50% faster wage growth than people in the highest 10%. When working families prosper, America prospers. 5 million jobs were created after enactment of the Trump tax cuts. Investment rose over 20%. We ended the decades-long trend of American businesses moving their headquarters and jobs overseas. The lesson we should take from the Trump tax cuts is that when we put working families first, help small businesses succeed, and give Americans the tools to outcompete China, America will win.
Congressman Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, at today's field hearing at the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines. He also said during his opening remarks he was disappointed that no Democratic members of the committee attended. Wall Street today, the Dow up 96, NASDAQ up 37, S&P up 11. Story from Forbes magazine, almost 40,000 people died on U.S. highways last year, and close to 500,000 perished in the past 13 years. But new federal plans to accelerate development of a connected vehicle technology announced Friday is aiming at not only reducing but eliminating deaths on the nation's roadways. The technology is called V2X, or Vehicles to Everything. Robert Hampshire, Principal Deputy Assistant Transportation Secretary for Research and Technology, explained at a news conference today in Washington what V2X is.
We believe that by integrating advanced technologies, we can make our roads safer for everyone who uses them. So today, the gathering today, we're launching our Saving Lives with Connectivity plan to accelerate V2X deployment. This technology allows vehicles to communicate with each other, with other road users, particularly vulnerable road users, roadside infrastructure, with the goal of significantly reducing risk of crashes. The power of V2X technology is transformative. We believe it's a critical tool as we go to mitigate and eliminate crashes across this nation.
Robert Hampshire, Principal Deputy Assistant Transportation Secretary for Research and Development, at today's news conference in Washington. The chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, Jennifer Homendy, joined remotely by video.
Today I'm coming to you from the Ohio Turnpike Commission's office in Swanton, very close to where we're investigating a series of fatal crashes on Interstate 80. One of the issues we're looking at here is whether collision avoidance technology would have prevented this tragedy. Now, this is not a new issue for us. The NTSB first recognized the need for collision warning technology in 1995 following our investigation of a multi-vehicle collision in Menifee, Arkansas. The lead vehicle entered dense fog and was struck from behind. More collisions followed. A total of 9 vehicles were involved, and tragically, 5 people died. In the decades since Menifee, we've continued to advocate for V2X technology as a strategy for saving lives on our roads. 12 years ago in Chesterfield, New Jersey, an 11-year-old girl died in a school bus collision. 15 other children and the school bus driver were injured. 6 years ago, a 9-year-old girl and her twin brothers were killed at a school bus stop In Rochester, Indiana, a fourth child, just 11 years old, was seriously injured. 4 years ago, Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania, 5 people, including 1 child, died in a multi-vehicle crash on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. 50 others were injured. I was on scene for that investigation. 3 years ago in Phoenix, Arizona, 4 people were killed and 11 more were injured when a commercial motor vehicle struck a queue of passenger vehicles at about 63 miles per hour. I could go on. In each case, we determined V2X technology could have prevented the crash. Today, the NTSB has 10 open safety recommendations to DOT related to V2X, focused on protecting all road users, in vehicles and outside vehicles, which has never been more critical as pedestrian deaths have soared across the U.S. since 2013. Our most recent recommendation from Mount Pleasant calls on DOT to take a leadership role to implement a plan for nationwide connected vehicle technology. We issued that recommendation because we fervently believe strong, clear DOT leadership is essential for nationwide V2X deployment. I'm here today because you've done just that, and I want to congratulate you on behalf of the NTSB for embracing your role in saving lives with connectivity. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for being bold. Even though the safety promise of V2X is undisputed, its widespread adoption wasn't a foregone conclusion. And yet I firmly believe that DOT is essential to making it happen. The plan is a vital first step towards realizing the full life-saving potential of this technology that could prevent up to 615,000 crashes. That may have prevented the 3 fatal crashes that occurred right here in Swanton yesterday. At the same time, no one entity can do it alone. To save lives, it'll take every stakeholder at all levels doing their part.
Chair of the National Transportation Safety Board, Jennifer Homendy, joining remotely the Transportation Department's news conference in Washington on the rollout of this V2X, or Vehicle to Everything plan. The title is Saving Lives with Connectivity, a plan to accelerate V2X deployment. And it is a 20-page document. It includes this. The plan sets the Transportation Department's vision, aspirational goals, and milestones, and issues a call to action for stakeholders, including government at all levels, public agencies, and the private sector. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, I'm Susan Swain. Campaign 2024 has evolved in some unexpected ways. And from now until Election Day, C-SPAN promises you unfiltered coverage of the candidates as they battle to win the White House and Congress. You may not know that C-SPAN is a private company that operates without a dime of government money. And like many media organizations, we've been impacted by cord cutting. This summer, we are asking for you to help support our unbiased political coverage with a donation. Here's the good news. 100% of your contribution, large or small, directly supports C-SPAN operations. And best of all, an anonymous donor has pledged to match your donation dollar for dollar up to $25,000. You can find out more at cspan.org/donate. Help ensure that C-SPAN's unique, long-form coverage of politics is here to stay. Visit cspan.org/donate. Thank you for watching, and thanks so much for your support.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free, and wherever you find your podcasts. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, a Democrat, said today he will appoint his former Chief of Staff, George Helmy, to replace Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat. When Senator Menendez resigns on August 20th, Senator Menendez said he would resign after his conviction on federal bribery and corruption charges. Governor Murphy and George Helmy made statements in Newark, New Jersey. First, the governor.
Senator Menendez accomplished many things on behalf of our state and our residents, but sadly he will be remembered for putting his own interests ahead of the public interest. So today, at a time of such great division in our nation, when the bonds between our fellow citizens have grown so frayed, it is all the more important that we hold our nation's leaders of every political persuasion accountable when they are found guilty of breaking the law and betraying the people they are elected to represent. Here in America, and especially here in New Jersey, we do not reward leaders when they violate the public trust. We replace them with public servants who are worthy of high office. Public servants who will represent our families with honesty, integrity, and the deepest respect for the rule of law. And public servants who will live up to our state's most cherished values. That is why today I am incredibly proud to announce that upon Senator Menendez's resignation, I will be appointing George Samir Helmy to represent New Jersey in the United States Senate. George is the ideal leader to take on this role, and he has more relevant experience under his belt than perhaps anybody in New Jersey. For one, he is the longest-serving gubernatorial chief of staff in state history. You may want to question his judgment for that. Prior to his service in our administration, he served as state director to Senator Cory Booker, and before that he served the late Senator Frank Lautenberg. In other words, George understands on a very fundamental level how a U.S. Senate office operates, and he will be ready to run this office from moment one. And he will bring to this office firsthand expertise in providing the best possible constituent service to our state's families.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, a Democrat in Newark, New Jersey, with the incoming temporary U.S. Senator George Helmy, Democrat.
I'm the son of immigrants who left the country they loved everything they knew and everyone they cared about, and arrived, as millions had and have, to New Jersey. Their hopes were the same as the millions who've come before and the millions who have come since. My parents, who are here today, left everything behind and chose New Jersey as the place to give their yet unborn sons a better chance at opportunity and success. After settling into a 4-story brick apartment complex in Jersey City, my parents worked hard to climb the ladder of opportunity available in this country like no other. This allowed us to move to Glen Ridge, where I, along with my brother, went to among the best public schools in the nation, and then I went on to proudly earn my bachelor's degree at Rutgers, our state university. I am the older brother to a younger brother who I have looked up to since we were kids. I'm the husband to a wife I don't deserve and who is the rock of our family, and to 2 incredible sons who are my joy and are the most incredible young men. My family's experiences, coupled with a deep appreciation for the opportunities present in this country, made available to us through the communities we lived in and the support that we had, and a desire to be a part of defining a better future for my sons and their kids and so on, is what drove me into public service. My career in government started in this very building, when Commissioner Brendan Gill, who was gracious enough to join us today, and later Mo Butler, gave me a chance. They didn't know me at all when they hired me to serve in the offices of the late Senator Frank Lautenberg and Senator Cory Booker, respectively, giving me a shot when they didn't have to, and opening the doors that have led me here to this podium, and I thank them. Of all the policy and legislative accomplishments, as the governor mentioned, which I have been so fortunate to be a part of, it is without question my early assignments as a Senate caseworker that have brought me the greatest joy and have been the most memorable in sense of accomplishment. When I was hired, New Jerseyans were still reeling from the housing complex and the financial crisis of 2008, and our office was helping constituents refinance or modify their mortgages through the payments to federal programs the federal government had stood up. 13 years later, I vividly remember those difficult conversations with families who were on the verge of losing their homes. I remember the conversations with veterans who couldn't get their appointments in the VA, and seniors dependent on Social Security facing the insurmountable bureaucracy of the agency. I remember the joy when we were successful and the frustration and defeat when we weren't.
George Helmy in Newark, New Jersey, with Governor Phil Murphy. Since he left as Governor Murphy's chief of staff in the fall of 2023, he has been an executive with RWJ Barnabas Health. George Helmy has promised to resign after the November election, and Governor Murphy said today that he plans to appoint whomever wins the Senate race to be senator. That will give that person seniority over the other freshman senators who win in November and will be sworn in early January. Politico reports today that convicted Senator Bob Menendez on Friday took his independent candidacy off the November ballot, ending for good the question of whether the disgraced senator would complicate an election for the party that spurned him. An Associated Press article, mediators to the Gaza war ceasefire talks, said Friday the two-day talks wrapped up and they aim to reconvene in Cairo next week to seal a deal to stop the fighting. In a statement Friday, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar said talks were constructive and conducted in a positive atmosphere. They presented both parties with a proposal and hope to continue working on the details of the implementation in the coming days. International diplomacy to prevent the war in Gaza from spreading into a wider regional conflict intensified Friday, with the British and French foreign ministers making a joint trip to Israel, while internationally mediated ceasefire talks in Qatar entered their second day. That was from AP. President Biden made brief remarks at the end of a White House Oval Office event on a different subject.
One of the reasons why I was late for you all was I was dealing with the ceasefire effort in the Middle East. And we are closer than we've ever been. I don't want to jinx anything, but as my grandfather said, with the grace of God, good little neighbors, a lot of luck, we may have something. But we're not there yet. But it's much, much closer than it was 3 days ago. So keep your fingers crossed. Thank you.
President Biden in the White House Oval Office. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel with a statement. Secretary of State Antony J. Blinken will travel to Israel on August 17th to continue intensive diplomatic efforts to conclude the agreement for a ceasefire and release of hostages and detainees through the bridging proposal presented today by the United States with support from Egypt and Qatar. And from the Washington Post, the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel's fundamental principles are well known to the mediators and the U.S., and Israel hopes that their pressure will lead Hamas to accept the principles of May 27th so that the details of the agreement can be implemented. Meanwhile, senior Hamas officials said the outline they were briefed on did not align with earlier frameworks to which they agreed. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, writes Reuters, on Friday called for parties to the conflict in Gaza to provide concrete assurances guaranteeing humanitarian pauses in order for a polio vaccine campaign to be conducted. Gaza's health ministry declared a polio epidemic in the Palestinian enclave last month, blaming Israel's ongoing military offensive. Reporting from Reuters, Secretary General Guterres spoke at the UN in New York City.
We know how an effective polio vaccination campaign must be administered. Given the wholesale devastation in Gaza, at least 95% vaccination coverage will be needed during each round of the two-round campaign to prevent polio spread and reduce its emergence. The vaccination effort will include 708 teams at hospitals and primary health care centers, many of which are barely functioning, and by 316 community outreach teams throughout Gaza. And we also know what a successful campaign will require: the facilitation of transport for vaccines and cold chain equipment at every step, the entry of polio experts in Gaza, fuel for health teams to conduct their work, reliable internet and phone services to inform communities about the campaign, an increase in the amount of cash allowed into Gaza to pay health workers, and above all, a successful polio vaccination campaign needs safety. Safety for health workers to do their jobs, safety for children and families to get to the health facilities, and safety for those health facilities to be protected from bombardment. I am appealing to all parties to provide concrete assurances right away, guaranteeing humanitarian pauses for the campaign. Let's be clear. The ultimate vaccine for polio is peace and an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. But in any case, a polio pause is a must.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at the UN in New York City. Hamas put out a statement supporting a 7-day humanitarian pause in the fighting in Gaza for the UN's polio vaccination effort. U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff General David Alvin spoke today at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. about an Air Force reform plan designed to better align the service with its modern mission. The plan is called Re-Optimization for Great Power Competition. An explanation at the Air Force website has this: today, the Air Force once again finds itself at a critical juncture, an era of great power competition marked by a new security environment, a rapidly evolving character of war, and a formidable competitor. This new era requires understanding its challenges and the attributes needed to succeed. Here's part of General Alvin's presentation today.
After 9/11, the Joint Force did not need the Air Force to do what it needed the Air Force to do in the Cold War or in large-scale war, which is what the Air Force does. We roll back enemy air defenses. We establish and sustain air superiority in order to shape the battle space with the idea that we would create an unfair fight in our advantage for the combined arms. That's what we would do. But in the 9/11, post-9/11 counter-violent extremist era, that's not what they needed. What did they need from the United States Air Force? Unblinking ISR. On-call close air support, surgical strikes, the golden hour to help casualties survive, and to fill in the blanks where the rest of the Joint Force was. They needed bits and pieces of our Air Force, more diffuse, more fragmented. That's what they needed, and the flexibility and adaptability of our airmen and our capabilities enabled that to happen. How do we project power, though? I'll tell you, we projected power the way we still do right now. Crowdsourcing, quite frankly. The most coherent units that we normally deploy with are maybe an operational flying squadron and maybe the maintenance squadron that goes with it. And they will deploy from a couple of bases. They'll meet over this now mature installation over the Middle East because we've been doing it for over 2 decades. And the rest of the combat support elements, all those that make up the rest of it, will join in on them and meet in the theater. Why? Because we've been doing the same thing over and over for 20 years. It's a mature mission, it's a mature theater, and so we don't want to break the bases at home. So we'll take a couple from here, a couple from there, a couple from there. And we don't get punished for it because we can execute the mission that way and we don't break the base. And we manage our operations tempo individually like that. That's not going to work in the area of great power competition. If you have to pick up and go on short notice and execute combat power at scale, in a contested environment, you can't do it by meeting your fellow airmen in the theater and saying, hi, nice to meet you, let's go to war. That's not how you need to do it. The way we need to do it, this is where we're transitioning to in our projecting power in great power competition, is having deployable combat wings back to the unit equipped with everything it needs to pick up and go and command and control a different way into a contested environment, into an environment where you may be under threat. You may be under fire. You have to know how to do all of the joint warfighting functions. Protection, movement, maneuver, not just go to a mature theater and execute the air tasking order. So they need to be able to pick up and train through this AF4 cycle, train through the individual, the collective, the certification, and the commitment phase to pick up and go over into the theater and be ready to execute operations through what we have as agile combat employment, which is our schema maneuver that enables survivability and combat effectiveness in a more contested environment. That's what we need to do.
U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff General David Alvin at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. Article from Defense One: the U.S. government needs to be quicker about rolling out new integrated deterrence efforts, the Pentagon's top military officer says, as global tensions have risen since the Biden administration made the concept a key part of its national security strategy. Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General C.Q. Brown said Wednesday during U.S. Strategic Command's Deterrence Symposium, "What is old is new again. What is new is further complicated by emerging domains and technology. We needed a deterrence strategy to be integrated by design to deal with these modern challenges, and I would argue we need to be faster at developing and applying our new framework." The defense article goes on, the U.S. needs to bring back some Cold War deterrence practices, Brown said, as it moves towards a whole-of-government approach to deterrence. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox each day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.